All right. In this video, I want to talk about this fella here, David Benjamin. This is his YouTube channel, David Benjamin Christians Need the Gospel. And recently, one of his videos popped up on my recommended, and I checked it out, and I started listening to some more of what he had to say about the gospel and grace, and I was like, this guy, he gets it. He grasps grace, and he might even grasp it better than I do, because while listening to him, I was like, this makes total sense. This is exactly what I've been reading and trying to put together, and he was able to express it in a way that I couldn't. And I was like, yeah, it's just like how we're told in the Old Testament about how we're the clay and God's the potter, and we don't form ourselves. It is God that forms us. And if we fight against that, it's basically like the clay falling off of the potter's wheel there, or the table, and getting into the lint or dirt. And now the potter has to pick it up and clean it up and pull all the lint off of it and all the dirt and, mold it all over again at times. And it gets kind of messy, right? But, God's patient and he'll do that, right? But what we need to do if we want to live the Christian life and actually produce fruit and do good works is to basically rest. We just leave it in God's hands. He's going to form us. We can't form ourselves, and we can't force him to do it. And this is the imagery I was getting while listening to him. So I was like, you know what? I want to listen to some more of what he has to say, because in passing in his videos, he would talk about other things, one of them being dispensations. And he mentioned in dispensations about how we're saved by grace through faith through all dispensations. Everybody's saved the same way. And I was kind of like, you know what? I can see that. I see that a lot. I can see with Adam and Eve. And even when they sinned, God sacrificed a lamb, showed them that's what the Messiah is going to do, saved by grace through faith. You can see it with Noah, the grace there. You can see it with Lot and the grace there. You can see the grace with David, and even what David has to say in the Psalms about, I would offer up these sacrifices and these burnt offerings, but they're not required, right? So it was showing that David understands that the law is to show you that you can't keep the law and that you need a Savior. So even people in the Old Testament and people under the law were realizing this, and they wrote about it in the Old Testament. So I was like, yeah, I can see this, but there is an issue here. And part of the conversation was having had to do with this. And the reason why I'm making this video is to clarify things, because he just put up this video here, Motives in Prophecy Study, Ministry and Winds of Doctrine. And then he put, you jerk. I wasn't sure what that was about, but I decided to check it out because I thought maybe, hey, prophecy, a big thing about what we were talking about had to do with prophecy. So I wanted to see if he addressed it. And when in the last 5-10 minutes of the video, he was actually addressing what we were talking about. So I was like, you know what? I need to clarify some of this. But I'm going to take you through the steps to where we got to. Yeah. So one of the things we were talking about was in Revelation, when the church is gone, they've been raptured, and now we're dealing with Israel, with a Jewish mindset now. In Israel, the Jews are the focus. They're the church, right? And it says that in Revelation that they have the faith of Jesus Christ and they keep the commandments of God, right? And I was saying, well, how do you explain this? Like, I get that they have the faith of Jesus, and by the grace of God, God indwelling in them, they're able to keep the commandments. But how can you just explain that away? Right? Like, if they didn't keep the commandments, are they still saved? Because if we don't keep the commandments, we're still saved as the church. But it clearly says that they also keep the commandments, kind of implying that if they don't, there's an issue. Not to mention that there is a work in the tribulation, and that work is not to take the mark of the beast. Right? If they take the mark of the beast, they are lost. it's kaput, they're done, right? So they have to not do something. As part of the church, we just have to have faith, and it doesn't matter what we do, because all that matters is what Jesus did, right? So I was like, I don't quite see how you're seeing it, but I could be wrong. If you can explain it to me and show me how you see it, then awesome, right? But while talking about this, on this video here of his, a refreshing, the first love, a foretaste, the hidden manna, the word of life. And this was from March the 11th there. And as far as I know, I'm the top comment on it right now, the most recent one. And I started the conversation because I wasn't sure what he was saying when he was talking about we all have the same reward as the church because we're all one body. I was like, okay, but how do you explain, 1 Corinthians 3? And he explained his point of view right, and right in the sense that I agree, and he made it clear that we all are saved and we all have the inheritance from Jesus that he's going to share with us. But there's going to be, as I think he says, there's kind of like a memorial of our works. Not that we're saved by our works, but for what we've done, there's a memorial, kind of like in the crown, there's gems or something like this. He doesn't say what it is. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it has something to do where people can see that we've brought people in to the body. We've done this and that and the other thing, and it shows, right? There's some kind of memorial to it, and it's an eternal reward, right? And our reward is each other, right? The inheritance. Jesus is the reward, and we all share in that. And he's like, I can't argue with that. I just wanted, to be clear because I didn't know if you were saying that it doesn't matter what we do, right? That if I just sit back and do nothing, I get the same reward as David Benjamin here, who's doing an online ministry, and who knows what he's doing offline. He can be doing a lot of great works. I still benefit from that, from doing nothing. I get the same reward. But that's not what he's saying. He cleared that up. And he mentioned, just in passing, because I do the same thing, where you make a video and in passing you say something, right? And you don't remember everything you said in the video because your video might be on a certain subject about the law, but you talked about different things in it, and you don't remember everything you said or exactly what you said about it because that wasn't the focus of your video. And, I've done that too. So, we just said that. This fella just pointed out, that the time of Jacob's trouble is for the nation of Israel, not the church. And I was like, yeah, I'm not arguing that. I don't know why this guy felt like putting that out there, but I guess he felt the need to clarify that. He thought I was disagreeing with that or arguing about that. I am not. I believe in saved by grace through faith. The church is going to get raptured. Then the seals are going to be opened. Just to clarify that. And this is where he mentions the time of Jacob's troubles is a 7-year period. Right? And this is the focus of what I want to talk about and focus on in this video, even though I'm giving you this kind of long introduction here, just to show you the train of thought and where it's coming from, and to show you, what I'm thinking here. So I asked him about this 7-year period, and that's what he talked about in his most recent video at this point here. He actually talked about it a little bit, about this 7-year period. But he doesn't explain how he gets this 7-year period. There's only one verse that mentions anything about a 7-year period, or 7 years, and you need 2 or 3 witnesses to establish a fact. So if you have one witness saying that this period is 7 years long, where's the one other witness? You need at least one more, right? Because when we read Revelation, we don't read about a 7-year period. We read about a 3.5-year period. We read it mentioned as 1,260 days, 42 months, and a times, and a dividing of time. Those are all 3.5 years. And I do not see how you discern that to be different 3.5 year periods and not the same 3.5 year period. Right? I don't get that, other than I get that you see Daniel 9:27 as this 7 year period. So if that's a 7 year period, you have to divide Revelation's mention of 3.5 years into 2 different time periods. So if you're going to do that, I need help understanding how you are able to tell which 3.5 year period in Revelation is talking about the first 3.5 year period, and which times it's actually talking about the second half. And I might get into that a little bit in the video. I'll bring it up on one of these tabs here to show you where it mentions it, to break it down, because I've been asking people about this, like, explain to me this 7 year thing, because the only place where it's mentioned is in Daniel 9:27, and I'm going to get into it and show you that it doesn't quite say what people say it says. Right? If we just take it for what it says and let the Bible explain itself, it doesn't say that there's a 7 year peace treaty, a 7 year covenant, or anything like that. And I'll explain. I hope you take the time and hear me out. But if you want, I guess you can check this out, this conversation here. I'm just going to briefly skim over this. Some of the replies are a little lengthy, so I'm not going to bore you with that, and it'll probably bring up something that will distract me off the topic. But basically, I'm saying what I'm saying now. And one of the reasons why I'm making this video is because I felt kind of dismissed from him in this, because he talks a lot about having to deal with trolls and not wanting to debate, and he can't answer every question, and he doesn't have the time to engage and respond. And I felt kind of dismissed, but at the same time, I understand dealing with a lot of people's comments, and you deal with a lot of, I'm not going to lie, they're shitbags, right? They just want to distract you and waste your time, and they're not very genuine, and they're trolls. So I get that, and I get that I'm going to be seen like that, especially with my YouTube username. Some Christians don't like that, but I guess you can get over that, right? Oops, I accidentally hit show less. But if you want, you can check that out. We're talking about that a bit. And I didn't want to focus so much on the saved by grace through faith in every period of time, even in the Great Tribulation. I wanted to really focus on the 7 year period because I think it's important. It's important because for the people left behind. If they think there's a 7 year period, it's going to change the way they look at things than if it's a 3.5 year period. Right? So we need to clarify that a bit and leave a record for them that they can be sure of and that they can use as a solid foundation when they actually start looking into this stuff themselves. But anyway, maybe they don't need it. Maybe the 144,000 and the 2 witnesses will clarify all that. But yeah. But anyway, here's one of the lengthy ones he put. Nothing really explaining the 7 year period. He was talking about its importance, right? About Daniel 9:27, the importance of it. Not the importance of the 7 years, but the importance of that verse and how Jesus brought it up. And he talked about the same thing in the video, almost word for word, right? He talked about this thing in the video, and I was like, oh, okay. And I know he's talking about the conversation we've had right here. I don't know if he's seen this yet, because not too long after this, he in the video he said he's on the road to go do a gig. So I don't think he's seen this, what I replied to him here. But I wanted to focus about the 7 year period, right? And I don't see it anywhere mentioned outside of Daniel 9:27. And you need 2 or 3 witnesses to establish something. And I don't see how you can take Revelation and the 3.5 year periods there and say that it's a 7 year period. Like, how do you connect that? I'm not saying it's not 7 years, but I don't see how it's connected in a way that's 7 years. But again, maybe I just don't see it, right? And I need someone to help me out on that. And that's basically that. So that's what I'm going to get into here. I'm going to get into some of the things he brought up in the video and in this conversation here, and focus on this. Daniel 9:27. One of the things he brought up is something that I've talked to people about before, where they say, after, this key word here, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Right? So they're like, yeah, 62 weeks, the Messiah is going to be cut off. That means he's cut off before the 7 years, the last week of these 70 weeks here. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that he's cut off right after. Right? Because right here it says, this Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself, and the people and the prince shall come and shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Well, that didn't happen right after the Messiah was cut off. Right? That happened some 30, 40 years later. Right? So to say, oh, this has to happen right after the 62 weeks here, then, yeah, I mean, that's not how it necessarily has to happen. Right? It's kind of like saying, after 2 o'clock this afternoon, I'm going to give you the $20 I owe you. Do I have to give it to you right when it hits 2 o'clock or right when it hits 2:01? Or could it be like 5:30 in that afternoon that I finally give you the money? Or even 10:30 at night, I finally give you the $20 I owe you. It's still after 2 p.m., right? So to say after 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off doesn't mean he's cut off directly after the 62 weeks, right? Because now going on to this key verse here, it says after the 62 weeks the Messiah shall be cut off, and then the prince shall come to destroy the city and the sanctuary, right? So it's talking about the Messiah and being cut off, and then it talks about the prince that shall come. And it basically repeats this. So, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So let's focus on this point. This would be the Messiah, because the whole point of this paragraph is about the Messiah, not about the Antichrist, that the prince that will come to destroy the sanctuary, right? So it's basically how this sentence is structured, about the Messiah and then the Antichrist. The Messiah, then the Antichrist, right? He shall confirm a covenant. Okay, if we read Daniel, and if we read the Old Testament, what is this covenant that is going to be confirmed? We let the Bible explain the Bible. It doesn't say a covenant, it says the covenant. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Well, what is the covenant? Where is there a mention of this covenant coming from this prince that shall come, from the Antichrist, from the false shepherd, from the Assyrian? Right? Where is this covenant mentioned in the Old Testament? Maybe I haven't seen it. Maybe I've overlooked it. But when the Bible talks about the covenant, it's about the covenant with God. And what we read in Jeremiah 31, I think it is, about the new covenant, where Israel's sins are going to be remembered no more. That covenant is what Jesus was confirming. And as you can see here, it says, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. It doesn't say that the covenant is for 1 week. It doesn't say the covenant is for 7 years here. He says he's going to be confirming it for a week. So the covenant could be for that 7 years. The covenant could be forever, an everlasting covenant, eternal, right? He's confirming the covenant for that long. It doesn't say that the covenant is 1 week long. It says the confirming of the covenant is for a week. Right? So just this first sentence, it seems like Christianity has just changed it. Because why would they think that this covenant is some kind of other covenant? I know a lot of people say, oh, it's the covenant with death, the covenant with hell. And he's like, well, why do you think that's a covenant with the Antichrist? The covenant with death and hell is the law of Moses, the covenant given at Mount Sinai. You can read that in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, where it talks about the ministration of death. The ministration of condemnation is what was written on the tables of stone that made Moses look glorious when he came down to present them to Israel. Right? That's the ministration of death and condemnation. The covenant with death, because the law condemns us all to death and hell. Right? So to think that this covenant is some kind of covenant with the Antichrist doesn't make any sense. And to think it's 7 years long doesn't make any sense either, because it says it's being confirmed for a week, not that it's a week-long covenant. Right? Just doesn't make any sense. He goes on here to say, and in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Right? Well, that's what happened when the Messiah is cut off. Right? He's cut off as the sacrifice that all the other sacrifices pointed to. So all of that ceased. The curtain in the veil that was in the temple was ripped. The sacrifices were no longer accepted. We all had access into the most holy place. Right? We had all access to heaven, to God himself. We didn't need the temple anymore and those sacrifices. We have Jesus. Right? And then it says, and for the overspreading of abominations ye shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Right? One more thing before I break this down is that in the midst of the week he shall cause it. The sacrifices and oblation to cease. Jesus started his ministry when he was 30. 3.5 years later, that's in the midst, that's halfway through a 7-year period, halfway through a week, that's when he's cut off. And he causes the sacrifice and oblation to cease. That doesn't mean people don't still sacrifice today. They're no longer accepted. You have Jesus as the sacrifice now. Right? And for the overspreading of abominations, ye shall make it desolate. This is something I'm going to be getting into with these two passages I have up here. It's going to be desolate until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Right? So in order to break this down, I'm going to share with you these two passages here. This is something else that this fella David Benjamin brought up here. Talking about the abomination of desolation. Right? And this is what he says, is like Jesus says this is future. And it's like, yeah, this is future. These two things don't have to be back-to-back things. You see, like the comma can be a separation of a day, a week, a month, a year, a decade, a century, a millennium, 2 millennium. That comma is a space between the time of things going on here, right? Just like this period, the end of the sentence, it kind of comes back. It actually rewinds time, talking about the Messiah being cut off, and then the Prince that shall come. These weren't back-to-back events that happened right after one another. And then all of a sudden we re-talk about it. And that's how the Hebrew mind sees things. It doesn't look at it as linear. It looks at it as repeating. Like the sun and the moon going up and down. Your day goes in a cycle. Your week goes in a cycle. Your month is a cycle. Your year is a cycle. It's circular. So it's a constant repeating. Wom, 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 wom. They're not looking at beginning, end. No, they see it as, okay, let's say here's the beginning of your day. The sun's at noon. The sun's going down. And we're going to talk about that day again. Oh, it's nighttime and day again. It's a constant repeating of the same thing. Right? So we got to change our mindset a little bit to think about how they think about things. But anyway, let me clarify this a bit more here. One of the things he was bringing up about the abomination of desolation and its future. And what I didn't like about what he did was he kind of started a straw man, especially in his video that he did. This recent one that he made, where he actually addresses what I was saying. He basically tied it into saying that the kingdom is now, like we're in the millennium already, and that the seals have already been opened and the horsemen have already been out, and all this stuff that I never said, he was kind of implying that it's all connected to it, right? And that's the start of a straw man, right? So I'm gonna hopefully cut that off there, and hopefully he won't try to make that connection again, because the seals have not been opened. We haven't been raptured, right? All I'm saying is this period of time does not seem to be a 7-year period. This period that's talked about constantly seems to be a 3.5-year period. And I don't know if it starts as soon as we get raptured or not. But that's a little bit off subject, something I might get into real briefly at the end. Just some opinions and speculation. But anyway, let me actually focus on this. In Mark chapter 13, it says at verse 14, "But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains, and let him that is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein, to take anything out of his house. And let him that is in the field not turn back again to take up his garment." All right, so it's saying, when you see this abomination of desolation, which is future from Jesus' time, get out of Dodge, right? And then right afterwards, he talks about, after the tribulation of those days, the sun and the moon shall be darkened, not give their light, and the stars of heaven shall fall. And then he talks about the fig tree parable here, right? So we can see all this connected. And this seems to be about what's going to happen in the future concerning the Antichrist and the start of this 3.5-year period. It seems to start when this Antichrist is the abomination of desolation. You know, he's showing himself to be God. He's dividing the land. He's changing laws and times, right? He's doing everything mentioned in Daniel. And that seems to be the start of this, right? And then it talks about after the tribulation, the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give her light. The stars of heaven shall fall, right? And the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. All right? And then a bit of a warning here about the fig tree, giving you a little bit of a understanding of when these things may start to take place. When you should really start paying attention is when you see the fig tree not produce fruit, but bring forth leaf. And Israel is doing that. They're bringing forth leaf, which is a symbol of self-righteousness. They're not bringing forth fruit, which is actually the righteousness of God. They haven't accepted Jesus as their Messiah. So that's something to pay attention to, right? And again, talking about summer is near. I think another hint towards rapture, because when this is mentioned, I think in Matthew, one of the warnings he gives with it is that one will be taken, one left. And this warning is to the Jews. He's telling the Jews, hey, you're going to see a rapture. One's left, one's taken. Then you know shit's going to hit the fan, right? So anyway, the reason why I also have this one up is because these things can be taken in multiple ways, as in they're fulfilled in multiple scenarios, right? Kind of like there's like a foreshadowing in a sense, right? Let me try to think of some examples here. As Enoch being raptured, you talk about the church being raptured, right? It's kind of a foreshadow, I can't remember the exact words to be used, a typology, right? Noah going into the ark, Lot being taken out of Sodom. You know, these different things are types of being taken out, and they can be fulfilled in more than one way. There's like different ways these are fulfilled, and there's an ultimate fulfillment. Like there's all these fulfillments of the Messiah. You see an example of the Messiah with Adam, where he willfully went into sin because he loved Eve. And you can see that played out in different ways, like Jacob loving Rachel, You see it with Joseph marrying a Gentile woman right before this affliction happens, right? You can see it with Samson stretching out his hands to take down the towers, to destroy the enemies. So you see all these typologies, but there's an ultimate fulfillment in Jesus. You can see with the Antichrist, with these fulfillments, or should I say these typologies with like a Nebuchadnezzar, what's his name, Antiochus Epiphanes. You see all these types. You can even use Hitler as an example. You see all these types, and then an ultimate fulfillment in the actual Antichrist. And you see it also typology with the popes. But ultimately, there's the ultimate fulfillment. And we can see this played out in typology over here in Luke 21. And it says, "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh." Jerusalem was compassed with armies in 70 AD. And it says, "Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled." Right? This is the same language here, but it's described a little bit different, where it's actually talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Right? Notice it always says the desolation and days of vengeance. Kind of like what we see here, that because of the overspreading of abomination, he shall make it desolate. For how long? Till the consummation. So it is right now. It's still pretty much desolate. They don't have their temple. They don't really own Jerusalem. It's desolate in a spiritual sense, right? And it's going to be until the consummation, and that's when what is determined is going to be poured out upon the desolate. So this makes it sound as though Israel or the Jerusalem and the temple are going to be desolate until the second half of this week, at which point judgment is going to be poured out, and we have a taste of that judgment and what happened to Israel at this time, right? Just like when we come over here and Daniel is asking, you know how long is this going to be? He's asking, I believe it's asking Gabriel. And it's interesting because he's asking right when Michael stands up for his people. It says, "At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince which standeth for thy people." And we read about that in Revelation chapter 12, where Michael stands up, kicks Lucifer out of heaven. And when he kicks Lucifer out of heaven, Israel flees into the wilderness for how long? 1260 days, also described as a time, and a dividing of time. That's 3.5 years. And what does the angel tell Daniel about the time of the end? He says it's going to be for not 7 years, but a time, times, and a half a time. Right? So that's very key here. Because that's what we end up seeing when we keep reading Revelation, which I think I'll branch to real quick to end the video after I explain a little bit more here. But we can see the same parallels here, where it's talking about the abomination of desolation here. We can see a parallel right here to what's going on when Jerusalem gets destroyed, that it's going to be something similar to that, right? And what was going on in Jerusalem at this time? Jerusalem was actually accepting a false Messiah. They were in rebellion, following a false Messiah because they wanted to break off the yoke of the Romans. Right? So we can see a typology that they were going after a false Messiah. And because of that, they were being judged and they got destroyed. Right? The abomination of desolation here. We can see a connection with a false Messiah and this Antichrist. We see, and then we go back over here. There's going to be the sun darkened, the moon not give the light, and the stars of heaven are going to fall. What's the next thing we look at Luke? There's going to be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. The distress of nations, right? men's hearts failing them for fear, and the looking after those things which are coming on earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Right? So we can see it doesn't say exactly the same thing. It says signs in the sun, moon, and stars, but over here it tells you what's going to happen with the sun, moon, and stars. Then there's a mention of this fig tree. Oh, the same thing over here, the mention of the fig tree. Right? So we can see how there's a fulfillment, and this is not the ultimate fulfillment. I know some people take this to be like, oh yeah, everything that Jesus said was fulfilled there about that in 70 AD. But that is just a typology. You kind of just tossing it aside, and there is actually a lot more to happen. And it's just letting you know like how bad it's going to be. Because in this time of this siege, the Christians left because they listened to Luke and they got out. But I think it's like a million or plus Jews died there, and a lot of them ended up eating their children, each other's children, because of how bad it got, the lack of food. And that's a taste of what is going to happen to the world. Right? You can take it as this, is Jerusalem represents the world. The Roman army that besieged them represents the fallen angels that are kicked out of heaven, and they're surrounding the earth. And at that time, there's going to be a very much a lack of food, and it's going to get so bad where there's going to be a lot of cannibalism, and people are going to be eating each other. It's going to be really bad, really, really bad. Yeah. That being said, I'm just going to go over to Revelation real quick and show the 3.5 years, and show how I don't get how this is 7 years. Right? I'm making this video. It's a little bit lengthy. I want to just explain myself. I know I made other videos about this, but I don't know. Hopefully this one is a little bit more clear. But when we come to Revelation chapter 11, we read about these two witnesses. They shall prophesy for 1,260 days in sackcloth. Right? So there's our first take of 3.5 years. During these 3.5 years, the two witnesses are doing their prophecy. Right? So, okay. And he says, when they shall finish their testimony, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. Right? So we get a bit of a timeline of something that's going on here. But then let's go over, you know what, I'll use these passages here. Just so in case I want to go back to chapter 11, I can do that easily. So let's go to chapter 12. We're going to read about this again. The woman, she flees for 1,260 days. And it's worded the same way, 1,260 days. So it'd make you think that this is going on at the same time. Right? There's been what seems to be a rapture. And the woman flees into the wilderness. The woman that gave birth to the man-child is Israel. And the dragon goes after her because the man-child has been taken up to heaven. And we can see here Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and they cast him out. And this 3.5 years is the same thing we've just read in Daniel. When Michael stands up, there's going to be a time, times and a half a time. Right? So it seems again we're seeing this 3.5 year period, and while Israel's fleeing into the wilderness, those two witnesses are witnessing to all those who did not flee. Right? And again, it mentions it one more time here, but in the same manner, if Daniel 12, where it talks about the woman fleeing, and down here it says, wow, I'm having trouble finding it here. Maybe it's down here. And the dragon was cast out and persecuted the woman, which brought forth the man-child. She was given to fly into the wilderness for, here we go, a time, times, and a half a time. And we can see this is just a repeating of what we just read up here. The woman flees into the wilderness. this tells you she's able to flee into the wilderness by the wings of a great eagle. And she's taken care of for, again, 3.5 years, but this time it's described in the same way when Michael stands up for this last bit of period here. So this period of time in Revelation 12 seems to be the same period of time right here. And, perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe I need some help to grasp this, right? But then we go over to Revelation 13. And this is the last mention in Revelation of any time frame. And it talks about this beast coming up and is able to continue for 42 months. So I don't know what that means about continue, like how long has it been around? But I think when it really truly establishes itself, it's allowed to continue for 42 months. And what makes sense here is that this beast here is going after the woman here. As it says, the dragon persecutes the woman, and it mentions something about sending out a flood. Yeah, the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman. Right? This is probably from this beast, because we read in Revelation 17:18 about the waters representing the people. So this flood can represent that this beast is sending out a huge flood of people to destroy the woman, Israel. Right? And yeah. So these 3.5-year periods mentioned in Revelation seem to be the same time period. But again, I don't know. Right? There could be something to it, right? It says when they finish their testimony that this beast, which is mentioned here, is going to overcome him and kill him. And I think it's Revelation 17 where we read a bit more about the beast, and the beast is the one that's sent out of the pit, the son of perdition, which the only other time in the Bible where we hear about the son of perdition, it is Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed Jesus. And it seems as though when he went to his own place, as we read in Acts, that it might have been this bottomless pit. And he's brought up again. And when he's brought up again, he actually thinks he's the Messiah. Right? He's actually self-deceived, deceived by Satan. And he kills these two witnesses, adding to his delusion that he's God. We got the abomination of desolation. And yeah. If you want to say his deadly wound was healed, a lot of people think that he's going on for 3.5 years. It doesn't say that. It says his deadly wound was healed. What it seems to be saying when we connect with Revelation 17 about one of the heads being wounded to death is a symbol of Judas, who betrayed Jesus, which would represent the entire nation of Israel. Israel betrayed Jesus and was left desolate. It's the only nation that really received a deadly wound. It was completely wiped out. Well, you look at the other kingdoms mentioned through Daniel and Revelation, where we got like Babylon, still exists as Iraq. Medo-Persia exists as Iran. Greece exists as Greece. Rome exists as Rome, or Italy, right? And these nations still exist, but Israel, as a nation, deadly wound, it was gone. All these other nations were wounded and weakened, but they weren't dead. They were just absorbed into another kingdom or made tributaries, right, into subjection to other nations. But they still existed. Israel was completely wiped off. It's a symbol of how they betrayed Jesus, like Judas, and that their deadly wound is now healed. It's the fig tree back that's producing the leaves, but not the fruit, right? So now there's going to be a change where now they have a chance to now accept their Messiah. And that's a whole other thing going on here. What I really wanted to focus on was this 7-year period is not something that is actually seen. When we actually study back into Daniel, we read about a time cut off, and like I showed at the end of Daniel, the time that's left is a 3.5-year period. Now, if you think that there's a 3.5-year period before this supposed Great Tribulation, which is the last 3.5 years, I don't see that, right? Maybe there is, but I don't know. Which ties into things about, does the tribulation start right after the rapture? Possibly, maybe, could be, but there could be, who knows, a 10-year gap, 5-year, 15, I don't know. How much time surpasses when we read in Revelation 4, when the church is raptured, how much time passes before the seals are actually opened? Right? It seems like things are going on, and the Lamb comes in showing that he's worthy to open the seals, and he opens up the seals. But how long does it actually take? Is it something that just takes a few moments of reading the chapters 4 and 5 of Revelation? Or does it actually take some time for all these things to happen? Right? Don't know. But, yeah. Stuff to think about, but like I said, what I wanted to focus on is just clarifying why I don't see the 7 years, but maybe I'm seeing things wrong, and if somebody could just take what is mentioned here in Revelation about these 3.5 years and show me how one mention of 3.5 years is the first 3.5 years, and how the second 3.5 years is mentioned somewhere else, and how they're not talking about the same period of time. They're not talking about the same period of time, but two separate 3.5-year periods. I need that to be explained. And I know some people talk about the seals and then the trumpets, and how like seals are first 3.5 years and trumpets are second 3.5 years, or stuff like that. And it's like, how do you see that? There's no mention of the time frame of when the seals start and end. There's no time frame of when the trumpets start and end. It doesn't tell you. Right? So it's like, where do you see this? The inspiration that you're being given, the insight that you have, please share it. Because I don't have it. I don't see it. But then again, maybe I don't see it. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe that's not just my focus, right? Just focus on sharing the gospel. Which is why I like this guy. It doesn't matter that we disagree on this. It doesn't matter that I think he's dismissing me and just kind of going with a Christian tradition and following it just because it's the tradition, and it has to be a 7-year tribulation because that's just how it is. Maybe I'm wrong, right? But all in all, he's sharing the gospel. He seems to really grasp grace, and that's what matters. So I think the guy's a great guy. Love what he's doing with the gospel. The little messages I hear that I've been checking out, where he's talking about the grace and the gospel, is just beautiful and a lot of insight, and I think is going to help a lot of people. People who are saved, it's going to help them. It's going to help them grasp it and truly stand firm in the faith, and I think it's going to help those who aren't saved to grasp the grace of God and realize it's not about them. It's about God and accepting what he's done. I think he does a really good job on that, and that's what matters, right? Salvation and saving others. This is a side topic, but I find it interesting, and if he doesn't want to engage in it, so be it. Hopefully somebody else sees this, maybe one of his followers sees this, and they want to stand up. That'd be cool. I've asked him in the comment here about, hey, you don't want to debate? That's fine. I'm not exactly looking for a debate. I'm looking for an explanation of how this 7 years is 7 years. I don't see it. So if I can be referred to a video or an article or somebody who can explain this, I would love that. I don't want to pressure you to talk about something you don't want to talk about. especially if you're associating me with trolls and trying to connect what I'm saying to we're already in the kingdom and the seals have already been opened, and you're going to be branching it off to other things that I haven't even said. Like, just because I'm saying that, hey, it's mentioning a 3.5 year tribulation, that doesn't change anything about the rapture and about the seals not being opened. That, changing the time period does not change, or should I say, changing the amount of time does not change everything else. Like the seals, changing the tribulation from 7 years to 3.5 does not mean the seals have already been opened. It just means when they're open, there's only a 3.5 year period, not 7 years. I don't get why he's making that connection. That's what I was saying. It just seems very dismissive, finding it kind of rude, but at the same time, I understand that he's probably dealing with other trolls and he's trying to stay focused where he's doing his job and also doing his ministry. So, it is what it is. Uh, people have been worse. He's not a bad guy. I just want to engage in this, and I deal with a lot of trolls that are very dismissive. So that's why I can understand how he can see me thinking that I'm a troll and he doesn't really want to engage and waste his time. And I hope he can see how he seems to be acting like a troll, being very dismissive and just kind of passing off what I've said and connecting it to other things, turning it into a straw man, as now I have to defend the rapture and the seals being opened and the kingdom being established when I'm just talking about a time period of the tribulation. I mean, yeah, I'm sure we'll get it cleaned up. But anyway, thanks for watching and take care.